Today, we're continuing to look at some things in theology where people tend to have sharp disagreements about, but in the whole big scheme of things, these are not things that matter. In the last 2 weeks, we've looked at baptism and we've also looked at communion. This week, we're going to be looking at the gift of languages and how that has been interpreted. And this is a non-essential. If you disagree with me on this, or I disagree with you on this, that does not get in the way of us following the life and lessons and teachings of Jesus. This comes just like communion came from how that was interpreted by the Apostle Paul and how that gets into what we do today and into the centuries that follow the times of Jesus. The ideas about baptism and the limitations and the steps and the procedures and all that really is what gets in the way of what it really is and what it's meant to be. And so today we're going to be looking at the gift of languages. And as a person who really wants to be fluent in Spanish and American Sign Language, but I have some challenges and some barriers that keep getting in my way. And where my mind and my desire is strong, my ability to actually retain and learn and study and not get things mixed up continues to be one of my problems. Do I believe I have the gift of languages? No. It takes a lot of work for me to do that. My eyesight gets in the way of me learning to sign because I get things mixed up. In fact, a couple of Sundays ago, I was telling a friend of mine who was in the same sign language class as I was, and I was telling him good morning, and I was trying to say, how are you? But, well, I was signing, how are you? My thumbs were not up. And so my fellow classmate was telling me that, well, without your thumbs up, you're not really saying, how are you? So I don't know what it is I was signing, but my spirit is willing, but my mind and my eyesight is weak. And because my vision is poor, I don't notice the difference between this and this from across the room. So that gets in my way. Also, some subtle differences in the Spanish language gets in my way. You know, where a word that ends in a vowel and then starts with a consonant, there's no pause in there. In English, we pause between words. Pero en español, look, I just did. I was going to say something in Spanish, but I paused between words. And that's not how native Spanish speakers talk. And that gets in my way of listening because I'm attuned to listening to words that are separated with pauses. And then I draw meaning from that. And when I'm listening to Spanish and it's all lumped together, then I have difficulty hearing to the point of comprehending. And that gets in the way. And actually then my mind really gets very tired to the point where I'm not hearing and understanding anything because my mind has been overtaxed. And I don't really understand that. And perhaps people that have the actual gift of language don't suffer that in the way that I do, or maybe I'm just being a whiny baby and I'm whining about my inability to master that which I really want to master. I attended the Spanish service at my church in the Heights, and I did pretty good understanding the prayers because prayers are predictable. My dad preached in Spanish, and I attended sometimes the Spanish service at churches where my dad pastored. And my dad's Spanish was slow because my dad was a very slow speaker, even when he spoke in English. My mother and I used to joke that we could have whole conversations on different topics while my dad was talking because there was so much pause and space between his words that we could have a conversation that between us and still not miss his conversation. Of course, my dad just thought we were being rude, but we really were making good use of our time. But anyway, I did pretty well with the service. I understood points that Pastor Pettis was making while he was preaching, and I connected several words. But what I found was I would hear a string of words that I knew, and then I tried to piece those together to make comprehension in my mind. And while I took all those words that I knew and pieced those together and made a comprehensible sentence, he had already given 2 or 3 more sentences that I completely missed. And so it was a problem for me. In fact, at the very end of the service, he wanted me to come up and join him in the final prayer. And my brain was so tired at that point, I didn't even realize he was calling me up. Someone else in the congregation had to come get me and said, "He's talking to you." And I thought, oh, how embarrassing that, but my brain was just really tired at that point. And so when I look at the gift of language, I really believe my dad had the gift of language. He was fluent in English. He was fluent in Spanish. He knew a lot of French. I remember when my dad pastored the church in Mineola, Texas, the pastor of the Nazarene church in the neighboring town in Grand Saline had been a missionary to Haiti. And so he was fluent in Portuguese. He spoke Portuguese. And I do remember hearing my dad speak in Spanish, and this pastor in the neighboring town, whose name just slipped my mind here, would talk in Portuguese. And it was interesting. My dad was talking in Spanish, and this other pastor was talking in Portuguese, but yet they understood enough. And I do believe that it is a gift or a talent in order to learn and acquire language. I think it is a gift and a talent in order to acquire language to the point where you can speak. I think it is a different gift and a talent where you have acquired a language so that you can hear and comprehend it. I think it's also a gift and a talent to comprehend someone who's talking to you, even in your own primary language, understanding that. I think it's a gift and a talent in order to read texts and emails and understand fully what is being said. I think in some ways you need to be face to face, not even on Zoom, face to face, looking at each other face to face, so that you can read the body language. Yesterday I had someone say hello to me, but I read the body language with that hello, and I did not take it as a hello. So maybe it was, and I just interpreted it wrong, but I believe I was interpreting a sarcastic hello, how are you, when it was really received by me as a challenge. Whether that was true or not, I don't know, and it's really not all that relevant. I do want to read from Acts chapter 2 just a little bit, and I will tell you my eyes are extremely tired, and this is supposed to be a large print. This is my favorite Bible currently. It's the NRSV UE, the updated edition. Let's see, what's the copyright of this? Copyright is 2021, and it was published in 2022. And this is supposed to be a larger font, but it isn't. But I want to read from the beginning of chapter 2 in the book of Acts. Now remember, this is the Acts of the Apostles after Jesus was gone. Jesus was not there walking among them in human form. So when I say I am a follower of the life and lessons of Jesus, while I do like to study and participate in dialogue about the Acts of the Apostles, I am very, very much aware that the apostles were not Jesus. And I think there are many in theology today that don't keep those ideas separate and straight enough to really understand. Are we following the life and lessons and teachings of Jesus? Are we following the Apostle Paul? Are we following Peter? Are we following Matthew? Are we following John? Are we following James? Now, I'm naming some people who have some important things for us to think about and to apply, but I must know and understand who Jesus is and was. And I must know and understand those that are not Jesus. I need to know and understand that the pastors of my churches are not Jesus. They are not God. I need to know and understand that the manuals of the churches, the church rules, the church procedures, the church bylaws are not God speaking. They are not the words of Jesus. And we need to know and understand that. Your parents are not God or Jesus. If your parents are dictating your theology, that might be okay, but that also might be a problem. So I am reading from Acts here, and we need to know that this is post-Jesus. When the day of Pentecost had come, they were all together in one place, and suddenly from heaven there came a sound like the rush of a violent wind, and it filled the entire house where they were sitting. Divided tongues as of fire. You know, I always learn this, that tongues of fire landed on them, but it says divided tongues. Tongues are languages. So divided languages as if it was fire. So if it's as if it's fire, maybe it wasn't fire. Appeared among them. So divided languages appeared among them. And a tongue rested on each of them. All of them were filled with the Holy Spirit and began to speak in other languages as the Spirit gave them ability. So it's, I was taught and believe this idea that fire, flames, an individual tongue or piece of a fire came down and rested on them, and it didn't burn them up somehow. And each fire landed on them, and they had the ability to speak in these other languages. So it says divided tongues, divided languages. So it's as if out of all the languages of everyone that was speaking there came, and one language fell on one, another language fell on another language fell on another. And so what happened was, this person was able to speak in a language that these people could understand. This person was able to speak in a language that these people could understand. So these tongues of languages came as if by fire. I really hadn't looked at that language, the metaphorical language or the simile, as if by fire. Not like fire, as if by fire. And the metaphorical language there teaches me something today that I did not used to know and understand, in the same way that I am in this moment today talking with you. Now, picking up with verse 5, and I apologize, I'm having extreme trouble seeing. Let me try my computer glasses if they're helpful. No, it's not the computer. Okay. I'm going to have to do something about my vision, but I don't know what that is. Now there were devout Jews from every people under heaven living in Jerusalem. And at the sound, the crowd gathered and was bewildered because each one heard them speaking in the native language of each. Amazed and astonished, they asked, "Are not all of these who were speaking Galileans? And how is it that we hear each of us in our own native languages?" And then it names Parthians, Medes, Elamites, and residents of Mesopotamia, Judea and Cappadocia, Pontus and Asia, and then some other places that I can't pronounce, Egypt and parts of Libya belonging to Cyrene, and visitors from Rome, both Jews and non-Jews, Cretans and Arabs. In our own languages, we hear them speaking about God's deeds and powers. All were amazed and perplexed, saying to each other, "What does this mean?" But others sneered and said, "They must be filled with new wine," which I don't understand. Isn't the new wine the one that hadn't fermented? So fancy way of saying they just be drunk or high as Cootie Brown or something. I don't know. So that's all the reading I'm going to do for today because I can't see. So I'm going to have some coffee while I lament my vision betraying me today. So when I think of this time, here's what I see. I see there were a group of people from all different parts of the region. I think about my little corner of Houston. I live in the Galleria area, which is extremely culturally diverse, which I love. I love diversity. I may not at first look like I am a culturally diverse person, but I am. And I thrive in diversity. I enjoy diversity. I love differences. I love languages. And I have always had a special place in my heart for Spanish speaking people, perhaps because my grandfather spoke Spanish, my dad spoke Spanish. One of my aunts communicates in Spanish. I'm not sure that her Spanish was ever all that accurate. My cousins that were from her household, she was married to a Native American man. But I know my female cousins now have, many of them have Spanish surnames from their marriages and their children. And I'm sure they are perceived and received as fully Hispanic as coming from the blending of my family with the Native American community of Oklahoma and Ohio and that area. So I enjoy the kinder, more accepting, the more loving people that I find in other cultures besides that of the Anglo-American culture, which in many ways is very harsh, critical, and just downright mean. And I don't thrive in environments like that. So the whole idea of languages is fascinating to me. I wish I could speak multiple languages. I wish I could live at least part of the year in a Spanish-speaking community, although I have found that there are many Spanish-speaking communities here in my Houston region. Before living in Houston, I lived in Weslaco, which is in the Rio Grande Valley, which is greater than 90% Hispanic, and almost everybody who lives down there speaks Spanish. So I like the idea of language. And so I've been having some different thoughts about this some people call the gift of tongues. I choose to call it the gift of languages because some of the things that's said about gift of tongues, an unknown heavenly language, does not align with my understanding of the biblical text and does not align with my personal theology. Now, that doesn't mean if you disagree with me that I think you can't be a Christian. No. And because I disagree with you does not mean that I can't be a Christian, because that's not an essential element to following the life, lessons, and teachings of Jesus. And I am not going to put the life, lessons, and teachings of some of the apostles or 2,000 years later in some of the church theologies above that of the life, lessons, and teachings of Jesus. So when I think of this gift of languages, I've always thought about these tongues of fire, which now we says these tongues came down of languages and rested on each of them, as if individual tongues of a flame, as if. So the literal fire resting on their heads may not be the way that I have understood it for the first 63 years of my life. And this as if means as if it was, but it's not. As if it was actual fire, but it wasn't. So that's how I'm reading it today. Now, some of my other thoughts, I said, okay, so this gift of languages, where was the miracle? Now, the literal scripture that I just read, granted, it's an English translation. That's a revised English translation of a revised version. We need to know and understand that. Reading it in English, which it was not written in English, and maybe I need the gift of languages to understand the Bible because I'm reading an English version and none of the characters in the Bible that we studied spoke English, heard English, read English, or wrote in English, and certainly not in the English we have in the 21st century. In the past few weeks, I've been thinking about this gift of languages because it's one of those things where no matter what you believe or what I believe, those beliefs are pretty solid and we're probably not going to change those beliefs. And so it falls in that category of things that I just don't discuss with people because we have our set opinions and beliefs and they're not going to change. But I've been thinking about this for several weeks now, knowing that this was a planned podcast for here in December of this year. And I was thinking, although the literal languages says each one of the apostles were able to speak in the gift, the language gift that rested on his head. If Peter was gifted with Arabic and James was gifted with Spanish, that doesn't mean that Peter was speaking in Spanish or that even Peter was gifted with all language. It says just one little piece for a moment, maybe. We do know that the 11 disciples then were dispersed throughout the region. So they were in areas where people spoke other languages. So they had to learn some language skills in order to communicate, and especially communicating with some complex concepts involving the life lessons and teachings of Jesus. I wonder if the real miracle was not necessarily landing on each one of the disciples. What if the miracle was flames as if fire landed on each disciple and everyone in the crowd was able to hear and understand and comprehend in their own language, or as if it were in their own language. What if the miracle was in hearing and not in speaking? Now, biblical literalists will read an English revision of a revised biblical text and say, "No, Larry, what's wrong with you? It says there, right, black and white in English, that each disciple was able to speak a language so that the people around him was able to know and understand what was being said." So, is it important to distinguish between that? No, it really isn't. All I know here is that something happened and people were able to hear and understand in their own languages that which was being spoken. Was the miracle in their hearing that they're able to hear and understand? Or was the miracle in what was coming out of the mouths and lips and breath of the other people? Maybe it was both. Maybe the miracle was in the speaking and in the hearing, because we know communication is a two-way passage. Something is coming out and it's being received and it's being processed in the brain, and then hopefully it returns in the manner in which it was intended. So, I think this is a valuable story for us as we experience ministering to people from different cultures, different languages, or from just different life experiences. The parents that I have and grew up with were not the parents you knew and grew up with. Were not the parents they knew and grew up with. And those differences might have nothing to do with culture or language. And I think all of our life experiences actually impact our ability to communicate. And communication isn't just the talking, but it's also the hearing. So when I look at the gift of languages here, I think of it as the gift of hearing language, hearing and comprehending. So I hope you have enjoyed this little chat. This is not a chat where I've got my points 1, 2, and 3 and my sub-points and my dialogue to convince you to ride along with me on this journey with this topic. No, most of this is just me sharing my wonderings. I wonder. And I'm not going to get bogged down on being right or on someone else being wrong. I'm living my life following the life and lessons and teachings of Jesus. And I am fascinated by those who have this special gift of language, speaking in a language that they did not grow up learning as a child, and people that have the gift of hearing language that they did not grow up hearing. Thank you for watching this podcast. Be sure to like, share, and subscribe, and I'll catch you on the next one.